great to be back here again. Tomorrow is Friday, Parashat Tizaveh. It's also Shabbat Zachur. In this week's portion, we're going to read about the garments of the priesthood. We're going to be reading about Amalek, remembering Amalek. It connects, of course, to Purim coming up on Friday. Here in most places in Israel, in Jerusalem, they'll celebrate a 3-day Purim. And, of course, to this week's portion being Shabbat Zachur, remembering Amalek, we have unfortunately too many reminders all around us, and while we have to continue to remember Amalek, and it's something we can never forget, never again. And we just commemorated the massacre of the Fogels just yesterday, 14 years later. I'd like to just talk about something I read in an article a couple of, last week, about a Haredi soldier. His name is Mendel Rada. He was the son of an Admor, a very ultra-Orthodox boy, young man who decided he wants to do the army. And that's really, beautiful when you think about how, in a natural way, the Haredi world is a big awakening to serve the country, especially after what happened October 7. A lot more feel the need to serve in the army. And eventually, we just be patient. We'll see big changes taking place in the land. Politically, there's a lot of issues going on around that. It's all just to make political noise. But anyway, and I was fascinated when I read his words and how he spoke about, he said he's ready, and he wrote, he's a musician and someone very, reminds of King David, that on one hand, that gentleness of a songwriter, musician, and that fierce fighter for Israel. And he talks about how he's willing, and he writes, he's willing to give his life for Israel. And he writes how he felt the divine inspiration when he closed his eyes and they were singing the national anthem of Israel, Hatikvah, together with they sung Shlomo Kalyabach Zetzal, Rabbi Shlomo Kalyabach, who was a great singer, Hasidic melodies, and he sung Bimkomcha Malkeinu Tofia, Betim Lo Chaleinu, Ki Mechakim Anachnu Lach. We sing, let Hashem kingdom come upon us, let it appear, and let God be king over us. And that's how, of course, there was a song of redemption. Powerful words, and I thought right away, this Mesiut Nefesh, this willingness within Israel is so innate when a person has this natural thing to give his life for his people. And he talks about how he wants to heal the broken hearts of our nation, and how he's willing to give his life for Israel. And it's something really innate in the Jewish people. And we say every day, we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, we say twice a day, and it's known. We have to have in mind the willingness. When we say Shema Yisrael, the Ari Kadosh, he talks about how every person has to, when he says the Shema, how he has to think, how he's willing to give his life, for the sake of Hashem in the world. If he has to give his life, he's willing to give his life. And that's something, Mesiut Nefesh, for the sake of Hashem, it's for the sake of his people, for the sake of his land. That is giving his life over for the sake of his people. And that we say twice a day, every day, when we say the Shema. Fascinating. And that's something that's so innate. When you hear how the hostages, a lot of hostages that are coming out, how they're talking about. Some said they never said Shema Yisrael before in their lives, and they found themselves saying it for the first time. We see a huge change. So the inner essence of the people of Israel is coming out. This terrible thing that happened, we see good coming out of it in the ways that it's connecting people and bringing them to a much higher spiritual level, which will bring down the divine presence to a much greater extent. And connecting, a little bit connecting to the portion and Migillat Esther, the portion of the week talks about the garments, the garments of the high priesthood. And if you look in the Migillah, we learn out, the Talmud brings down that we learn now from the word Tiferet. Tiferet refers to splendor, which the word is mentioned in our portion. And regarding the garments, it's mentioned in the Migillat Esther. And we learn that Achashverosh, when he was making his banquets and his parties and celebrating, he actually was celebrating with the garments of the priesthood. Which was, can you imagine thinking about that, taking the garments of the high priest and celebrating in his kingdom over there? What a disgrace. And the concept of garments we see so that sort of begins, because the Megillah begins with the garments. It talks about the parties, right? King is a king of 127 different states in his land, in the world. He's the king of the world, an empire he has, and he's interested in making parties for 180 days and makes a 7-day party in Shushan. And he's having the vessels of the temple, and they're celebrating basically that temple wasn't rebuilt, and all that. And unfortunately, there are Jews that attended this banquet, as the Talmud brings down, and therefore, they had to repent for that terrible thing of participating in that banquet. And it's very interesting. I read a beautiful source. We think about it. Why? Because the Talmud says, why was the generation of Israel liable to death? Because that's really what had basically happened. There was a decree to kill all of Israel, the final solution of the people of Israel. So there must have been some very, very serious, grave thing we did. And the Talmud asked the question, what did we do that we were liable? The same thing Queen Esther, right? Queen Esther asked the question when Mordechai comes and he's wearing a sackcloth. She says, Mazel, what is going on? What did they do to be liable of such a terrible punishment that now there's a final solution for Israel? And what is the answer? The Talmud gives was that Nehenu me'asuda shel oto rasha, that they actually participated in the banquet of that evil Achashverosh. They were there participating. So right away, the question that our rabbis ask, when someone participates in a meal, even if they ate non-kosher food, but it still not warrants death penalty for all of Israel, it's something, they went over a lav of the Torah, a prohibition of the Torah, but not something that's punishable by death, that they're now, God decided to allow Haman to wipe them out. Of course, that was reversed, but still, that was the decree upon them. And others even say that they didn't even eat, they ate kosher food. They ate kosher food because there was non-kosher food for the Gentile and kosher food for the Jews, and they watched over the wine and things that they can eat, so they would eat kosher food. They were really very, very particular, making sure they ate kosher food. So why at the end were they punished? And for the decree to come out? And the answer is, and they explain, is that it says in the Talmud, nehenu, that they enjoyed it. In other words, they could have, and the Chatam Sofer explains, that they could have, before they went to the party, they could have stuffed their bellies with something. And then when they came to the banquet of Achashverosh, they were could have been so full, they could, make like they were eating something, but they wouldn't have really been enjoying it because they were already full. They could have done something like that. But whatever it was, they enjoyed it. They had some personal enjoyment. And the fact that they enjoyed it was really, they sort of gave in to their yetzer, to their, their desires to enjoy from the party itself. And that, if I look, and I'm looking, I was thinking, contemplating over the things we're talking about, the whole Migillat of Esther, it's sort of, there are two different sides. On one hand, we see it's all about personal enjoyment, about making these banquets and honor, right? Haman wants to be bowed down to, he wants to be honored with being adorned with the garments, of the kingship, which we see later what he requests, when the king says to him, when he falls asleep, he remembers, he can't fall asleep, and he remembers, I didn't pay back the, Mordechai Yehudi that saved my life from the plot that was plotted against him. So then he says, what should he do? So Haman says, okay, give him the garments, your garments, which obviously were the most finest garments he had, which is a hint again to the priestly garments, that he said, and dress Mordechai Yehudi with those garments. So that in itself, when we think about that whole concept, this is what the honor and kavod, like a person, a lot of times, a garment, I gave a lesson once on garments, and we spoke about how a lot of the words, they come, like the word levush, for example, which was brought down here in the Migillat, comes from the word busha, being embarrassed, because a person covers over his privies, right? The same thing, it also means me'il is a jacket, also means to rebel. Beged in Hebrew is also a word for a garment, meaning to rebel as well. So a garment could mean two things. It's what you're wearing, that counts, like what is inside the garment. But the garment could lie, the garment could be, it's not what you're wearing that counts, but what's inside the garment. On the other hand, it represents, the garment can represent your, the way you dress, of who you are. But in reality, we have to mention the most important thing is what's inside the garment. And therefore, And we see, it's centered around the garments. It begins with the priestly garments, opening up the Migillat, as I said to you before. But throughout the Migillat, the concept of garment is very powerful. As we see, Mordechai is wearing a sackcloth. That's his garment when he hears about the final solution that Haman wants to do to Israel. And then Esther's trying to get him to take away, to remove the sackcloth, and he refuses. And only after everything is reversed and all the good news comes, and then Mordechai goes out in a beautiful garments, as we say, it ends, the story after all that thing. The Jewish people had light and enjoyment, and Mordechai Yatsa Melavush Malchut, he came out with the priestly garments, with the kingdom garments, Tchelet Chov Agaman, the beautiful colors of Tchelet, blue and scarlet yarn, etc. So that was a sign, of course, the redemption. Now Malchut, now the royalty is here, the true royalty is here, which is fascinating. So we see that throughout the Megillah. On one hand, the concept of the garment, is there. But the garment represents two things. On the one side, as I said a moment ago, getting back to, there are two sides in the Megillah. On one side, we have the hedonistic side of enjoyment and everything for personal honor. You want to wear that. You want to wear the garment of your choice to show off what you have. It's all showing off, external thing. But in reality, the garment concept is what's inside the garment, the most important thing. That's the other side. Where on one hand you have Israel falling into the trap when I said before that they enjoyed for the banquet. They themselves fell into that hedonism and that enjoyment of a banquet of evil. Right? It's not that we can't enjoy, but we have to enjoy things of mitzvot, things of happiness, of good things, of Torah happiness, not happiness of evil, and just lust and all those kind of things. So we see both sides in the picture. So throughout the Megillah, this king who's trying to make making these beautiful banquets, and of course, then we see how he wants his wife to come to him, and now rabbis teach us to come naked in front of his people, all about lewdness and uncleanliness, and then he kills his wife. It's just everything for honor, and then he remembers what he did, and getting drunk. It's just unbelievable, the whole behavior of a king. It's the opposite of course, of any kind of of a true king. A king of Israel, a malchut, a true malchut, and that's seen in the beginning, right? The whole thing, and Israel falls into the trap. Not only that he continues to look for virgins. It's not enough. He brings another group. We see who this personality is. And on the other hand, you have Mordechai Yehudi, a special Mordechai Yehudi, who was not willing to bow down to Haman, who's an idol worshiper, right? Haman turned himself into an idol according to our rabbis. And therefore Mordechai refuses, lo yechra v'lo yishtachlei, will not bow down to him. And as a result, Haman wants to wipe out all of Israel. He's not willing to fall into that trap. So we see here the Mesiut Nefesh again, that the Megillah on one hand is showing the personal needs, the personal desires. It's all for me. I want to look pretty. I want to have this. I want to have that. All about physical desires and honor. On the other hand, you have Mordechai Yehudi who's worried about the honor of heaven. You're worried about Mesiut Nefesh. He's willing to give his life for the honor of heaven. And then we have Esther, the beautiful queen Esther Malka, which is the greatest tragedy. In one hand, it's we have the greatest story of Purim. On the other hand, we have this great tragedy. What is the great tragedy? Is that a Queen Esther, that after Haman convinces the king, and he didn't have to convince him too hard. It was pretty easy when he stamped his stamp on the final solution of Israel. So Mordechai goes out with his sackcloth and he's trying, he's screaming, and Esther's not willing to wear any other clothes, and Esther finds out what happened, and they enjoyed from the banquet, we said. And then Mordechai tells her that you have to do something about this, and she said she can't go to the king because she can be killed, and not only that, she can be killed from the king because he hasn't called her in 30 days and all that. But at the end of the day, Esther takes upon herself also Mesiut Nefesh. She goes to the king. Not only that, the saddest thing, it says, Kasher avadati avadati. If I'm lost, I'm lost. What does it mean? The Jewish law is very clear, and it's known that Mordechai and Esther were married. That was his wife. And we see how he adopted her after she was an orphan. And this also shows the goodness and the love, how he adopts, we see the side of Mordechai. And he marries her. And this love story that they have between them, that is hope to get back. he had no control that all these women were being brought to the king, and Queen Esther was brought as well. And not only that, she was the one that it all worked out, that she was found favor in his eyes. But as long as, and she had to actually sleep with the king. She had no choice. And as long as she was doing this by force, this is sort of that she had no choice, she was forced into it, that's considered a rape situation. And therefore, she wasn't prohibited to her husband. But now that Mordechai was saying you have no choice but to go to the king, and you have to plead for your people, so now it's coming from her. And therefore, the great, most painful thing, she says, Kasher Avadati Avadi, rabbis explain that now she'll no longer be able to go back to her husband in the future. In other words, and our rabbis talk about how she was, when she had an opportunity, her and Mordechai were getting together. But now they can no longer get together as husband and wife because of that she's going willingly to the king, and then now it's not going to be considered no longer a rape anymore. Very, very powerful, painful thing. And in the end she does it, and of course we know as a result what happens, that the king gives her grace, and she's they reverse everything, and they end up wiping out Haman. So she literally gave herself. And it wasn't only her, because the husband is in the same pain. But we see everything they did was for the sake of God, for the sake of their people, the people of Israel, in a situation where they were at the end of exile. And where the prophets, Jeremiah said after 7 years they're going to go back, and they didn't lose their faith. They know that the time will come and they will return. But they were still in exile over here. And they had to give so much up for the sake of their people. And then eventually we saw the great simcha. It says, to the Jews there was a great happiness and rejoice of the miracle that they were able to overcome their enemies, etc., etc. And we always celebrate the story of Purim for the reversal of this terrible final solution of Israel coming out with flying colors and now rejoicing. But there's personal tragedies along the way. And that personal tragedy is a lesson of what we spoke about in the beginning of Mesiut Nefesh, which I told you about that soldier, for example, that people are willing to do what they can for their people, no matter what, no matter how much they have to give over of themselves. And the worst thing, when to give their lives, or even it's like giving their life when husband and wife can't be together anymore. And that's like a terrible tragedy. There's no word to describe the tragedy. But that was done for the sake of heaven. For the sake of heaven. They had no other thoughts in mind other than doing it for the sake of heaven, for the welfare of the people of Israel. And therefore, in their name, Mordechai and Esther, throughout history, is every year we celebrate this great, great holiday. And that the garments we spoke about, the garment of wearing, the king's wearing the king's garment, right? Lavush Malchut. That's exactly what Esther is. It says Esther wore Malchut. In other words, when a person becomes a lavush, when a person does for the sake of heaven for his people, so their garment, their real garment, the splendor of their garment, is in reality is that divine presence that is dressing them. They are dressed within the divine presence. The divine presence is shining upon them, and that's exactly what the priestly garments were meant to be in the temple. They were all meant for that purpose. And the purpose of the priestly garments in the temple is for the divine presence to shine, to see the beautiful splendor on our priests that are serving Hashem in the temple. That's what it's all for. We want the divine presence to shine upon us in that way. So if we take this message and we put it to our hearts, and as we read this portion of Amalek, and we read about, of course, Tizaveh, about garments, we want to make ourselves a vessel for Mesiut Nefesh, to be willing to do what we can for the sake of our people, to do good in this world. And that's the kind of spirit we have to have. And then we will merit in the garments of the divine presence resting upon us. And that is the beautiful story of the Migillat Esther. We learn about Mesiut Nefesh and all the personal pain, and we think about what happened in the last year and a half. So many people were killed, but they went to fight, knowing they may not come back, for the sake of Israel. And so we have thousands, unfortunately, many that fell in battle, in the battlefield and injured, and all for the sake of heaven, for the people. And that's why it says, there's no greater place, no one could stand in the footsteps of those who give their lives for the sake of our people. And this is a tribute, of course, to all our soldiers, to the Fogels, and all those people who have given their lives in the land, for Israel, for the people, to do the right thing. And let it be God willing that Hashem blesses His people, and that we will see great things coming in our doorstep very, very soon. And we don't want to have to see. We want happy endings. We want to see. I always say, we read about our forefathers, and we see how at the end the story of the Akedah, of Akedat Yitzchak, was when Abraham took his son to offer him. At the end, God stops him. It doesn't happen. And and we mentioned, we all look at all the stories of our forefathers. They're all happy endings at the end. No one, at the end of Joseph, they thought he was dead. It turns out he's alive. So we see our forefathers didn't have to really, in reality, they had happy endings. They didn't have to see the terrible misfortune at the end of the day. And that represents the redemption. At the end, we'll see how everything is really, and it will fall in its right place, and we'll have only good, only rejoicement, only happiness. B'ezrat Hashem. Have a beautiful Shabbat. Let it be a Shabbat Zachur, a meaningful Shabbat Zachur, and we will eliminate our enemies, and we will see our redemption speedily nowadays with the building of our third Beit HaMikdash. Shabbat Shalom, B'sarot Tovot, Yeshuot V'Nechamot.